Welcome to month 11, the flange and inner border for Cheshire Quilters Guild 2017 block of the month. First thing you need to do is to cut your 1 1/4 inch strips, the appropriate sizes, and piece. For the on point setting, you'll need to piece your strips, and then once you have, cut them to size. And then the next thing to do is to take them to your pressing surface and press them in half. Now I'm going to baste this to the edge of my quilt. I'm demonstrating on the straight setting, but you're going to do it exactly the same way. On the straight setting, it's square, so all my pieces are the same size, and I'm just going to lay my flange down, and then I'm just going to stitch inside the 1/4 inch, so less than a 1/4 inch seam, inside the seam allowance. I'm going to baste this. Now normally I stitch with a 2.5 inch stitch length, which is about 14 stitches per, or 12 stitches per inch. And so for this I'm going to stitch with the a 3.75, somewhere in the 3.5, 3.75. That's the length that you want to use, so that you can base this on. Now right now I've got it positioned for a 1/4 inch seam, so I want to just very carefully scooch this over so I'm inside the seam allowance instead of right at. My 1/4 inch is right on the outside of my foot, so you see I've got a little bit of a space there. That's what I want to do in order to base this on. So let me do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, I've got my flange stitched down, and I just overlapped it at the ends. Next thing we're going to do is take our border pieces and sew those on, just like you would normally sew a border. Since I'm working on the square quilt, I don't have to worry about which ones are which, since it's square. But what I'm going to do is the same thing I did when I stitched on the flange. I stitched the flange on with it underneath so that I could watch the seams, and so that the seams would come out nice stitched in the direction they had been pressed. For some folks, it might be challenging to keep the two edges of the flange lined up as you're stitching along. You could do a couple of things. I don't usually use pins, but you can pin it in several places to hold it in place. Or another option is to use a fusible or a washable glue to hook the two sides together so that you only have one piece that you're dealing with. When we go to sew the border on, we'll only have 2 pieces of fabric, the stitched together flange and quilt top, and our border, so that won't be a problem. So I'm going to sew on my border, and then I'll meet you over at the iron to see how we press it out. Here you can see I've got one of the borders on, and when you press, you want to keep the flange flat toward the center of the quilt, and then the borders get pressed, the inner border gets pressed out away. So underneath we're going to have all of the seams headed toward that inner border. So there it is. I just need to put my other 2 borders on, and I'll have this top done, or this step done for this quilt. So see you next month when we put on the outer border and I show you how to do eyelash binding. See you next time.